My name is Emily Boden. My presentation is going to be on the ethics of photo manipulation. I'm a photography major, so I thought this would be an interesting subject to cover. So, by photo manipulation, I kind of just mean retouching and editing, but in addition to that, also just the staging and just simple posing of an image, basically anything that makes a photo different than how it was found. Just a couple of examples. These aren't going to be my main case, but just different types of photo manipulation. So this one is by Arthur Rothstein. This was a really big controversial image. He was actually hired by the FSA to get support for Roosevelt's New Deal, which would benefit farmers. So he was one of several photographers that was kind of trying to take these photographs to invoke some empathy in the viewers so that they would support the New Deal. This particular image, he actually found that skull in a completely different place, and I think it was actually in a grassy area, and moved it to this dry, cracked ground. And this photo ended up being a really big symbol of the drought before people realized that it had been staged, which obviously caused a lot of criticism. This is kind of a weird one, but this is an instance where obviously without these two women's consent, Oprah's head was photoshopped onto the body of a 1960s movie star who only realized when she recognized her dress in the photo. So I thought that was pretty weird. Um, this one, Obama was giving a speech at the DNC in 2012. Obviously, as you can see by the photo, a lot of supporters were staying there holding these forward posters with the Obama logo on it. And a conservative magazine called the National Review photoshopped every single one of those signs to say abortion, which with that same Obama logo to kind of help out their political agenda. So those are just a couple of different examples of some different types of manipulation. So this is going to be my main case. I'm sure that we're all familiar with this trial from the 90s. O.J. Simpson was a really big football star. If you didn't know, he was accused of murdering his ex-wife Nicole Brown and her friend Ron Goldman. He was a really big celebrity, which resulted in huge, like extreme media coverage over his entire trial. The jurors of his trial were actually kept in a hotel during the entire thing, so they would avoid any exposure to the media. And this particular journalistic kind of ethical issue occurred in the middle of the trial. Obviously, as you can see, Time Magazine published a story about him. And as you can see from this photo, they used his mugshot as the cover. Looking at this, you might not notice anything wrong, but when you look at this next image, you can see that Time actually really heavily manipulated that photo. Unfortunately for Time magazine, their story came out at the same time as Newsweek, so readers were actually seeing these two magazines on the newsstand right next to each other, which caused people to realize they could compare and see how much Time had manipulated this photo. They made it a little bit blurrier, which is kind of weird. They made it very, very dark, and they added a vignette to the edges, and they made it really dark, so that it kind of altered his skin color, and they even make his face look very unclean and unshaven, which is just a completely different image when you really compare it to the image on the right. The People v. O.J. Simpson American Crime Story is actually a show on Netflix, just kind of a side note. If anyone's interested in this, it's on Netflix, and it actually touches on this Time magazine, this whole issue when this happened. So that's kind of something if you're interested in this case. It's not it's a documentary. It's obviously actors, but it's based on the events that happened in this case, and it has the exact same timeline. And they do talk about this just because it was such a big pivotal moment in this case. And the Time magazine cover was kind of caused a lot of outrage in this case. Obviously, when this happened, Time magazine came out with an apology just because of all the criticism they were getting. It's a very, very long apology, but in short, their editor at the time, Jim Gaines, basically said that they had decided to hire an artist named Matt Mahiran, who was a photo artist. He used photographs and manipulated them for his art. And that was kind of their way of defending themselves. They were just saying that they wanted to take an artistic direction on this, and that was basically their apology. in short, is really, really long. I included it in my sources, but it would have taken me a long time to read the whole thing. But that was in short what they said. What's at stake here is a lot of different things. The reputation of the photo retoucher Matt Maheron was at stake here. He got a lot of criticism for how he decided to take this art, I guess, and Time magazine as a whole got a lot of criticism as well. Their reputation was at stake, and a lot of people argued that O.J. Simpson's reputation was at stake. This photo happened in the middle of the trial. No verdict had been reached. His reputation at this time was really fragile, and a lot of people were arguing that this photo coming out really could have changed a lot of people's opinions on him at a time that a trial was happening on whether he committed murder. So that was a really, really big issue that kind of affected the integrity of that trial. And a lot of people argue that this photo kind of sparked what kind of the turning point in the trial that really made it about race. Because I'm not going to get into the actual trial because it's not as relevant to the journalistic aspect of this particular issue, but this was kind of a point in the trial where it was made a lot about race, and a lot of things were being thrown back and forth in the trial, basically centered around O.J. Simpson's race. So that was a really big issue on how this actually could have affected a trial that was ongoing, which I think is a very big ethical issue. Obviously, the public was very outraged very fast at this photo manipulation. There was criticism from just the public readers. There was criticism from other journalists and other people in the media. Basically, nobody was obviously excusing Time at all. No one was defending them in this. But yeah, they were, the main accusation was that Time was using kind of a correlation between a certain color of skin, a certain race, between a correlation between that and violence, and they were using that to sell more magazines. And especially since that magazine came out at the same time as the Newsweek magazine, it really didn't help them kind of with this accusation that they were in a competition. How this fits into our mission of journalism, this was just a really large, memorable event for journalists to be able to look back on, and something that they can learn from, and just something that they can look back on if they ever encounter a similar issue to this. Besides the apology, basically the only thing that Time did to respond to this issue was they pulled all of the magazines off the shelf and they replaced them with the original mugshot that was not edited, which a lot of people obviously agree that they should have done to begin with. Just a couple other examples of harmful photo manipulation, just because it's such a wide subject, a really big topic. Just some more recent, because obviously the O.J. Simpson trial was in the 90s, but these are even more recent. Really common things that happen a lot, and I think it's a really big issue that so often there's such heavy skin manipulation, skin retouching, body retouching, making people skinnier. Even in this, you can see that they made her hair longer, they changed the shape of her face and her nose and her lips, which is really crazy to me. And I think it's a really big issue when there's a lot of young, impressionable people not only reading magazines, but even on social media nowadays. Even I have like family members and young cousins who are in middle school and elementary school who have access to social media, which obviously is a whole issue in itself, but they're able to see this kind of thing and they don't have the ability to understand, like, to the level of how manipulated these photos are. Like, they don't know, they don't realize that this is not really realistic at all. And I think that's a really big ethical issue. I had to throw this really bad picture of Kim Kardashian in there. I didn't realize how bad that was. But here's another issue of skin, even, and this is a more recent, obviously more recent than the O.J. Simpson trial, was this young lady's skin was lightened in the magazine, which obviously a lot of countless arguments can be made for this in terms of lighting and angles and just filters and that kind of thing. But obviously seeing these two images side by side, there's a very, very big difference between these images that can't really be refuted. But there has to be a solution to all this, and I think there's a couple of different things that can happen. Obviously, photo retouching is such a big issue. It's very broad. There's a lot of things that fall under it. But in terms of the OJ trial, I think that the fact that the magazine decided to make the cover into an artistic type of thing wasn't really a good decision, because they were reporting on something that was currently happening, a really sensitive issue about a murder that had just recently happened. The trial was still ongoing, and just making that even further insensitive with the whole racial issue. Since they were reporting something factual, I do think that it was inappropriate for them to edit that photo at all. I don't think it should have been edited at all. I think that it was really yeah, irresponsible for them to do that, and I don't think that that should be allowed when a publication is reporting on something completely factual, because at that point they were changing that image into something that wasn't factual, and they were completely misrepresenting that image, which is pretty crazy. And just in general with photo retouching, obviously a lot of publications like the New York Times and NPR and the Associated Press, they have specific ethics codes for their own companies. And if you read those, you can see that pretty much all of those companies only allow a very small degree of photo manipulation, just basic lighting changes, nothing that would affect the integrity or anything about the subject of the image. And something that I think could be done to kind of discourage magazines and newspapers and publications from editing photos beyond that would be holding them responsible to acknowledging in print if a photo has been retouched beyond those simple adjustments. So if they have a young model who may have not given permission for them to edit her skin or to edit her body to make it hers bigger or smaller, I think they should have to acknowledge that in print somewhere. And that not only helps those models who are maybe models or celebrities or whoever it may be, who are maybe being taken advantage of and not realizing that their photos are being manipulated, but also just the average consumer, someone who's reading a magazine, who may look at that photo and not realize to the degree that it's been retouched, and they can look somewhere else on that page and see that someone acknowledged this has been retouched. I think that would be a really, really big step and such a big issue. And those are just the main things that I think are a couple of solutions that could be taken towards photo manipulation. It's obviously, like I said, a very broad subject, and I wish I could have covered more on it, but obviously I had to pick a couple things to stick to. But there's a lot of things that can be done about it. It's obviously an ongoing issue. It's still something that happens today, especially with technology and social media becoming so advanced. So, yeah, that's my presentation. These are my sources.